doing so many great things together, and ELSEC has evolved like ELSEC showed you, and this is very much a joint endeavor. I also want to welcome our new members that are first time here. This is actually the largest brain circle in terms of the number of attendees. And that's also exciting, and I really hope this is going to be a beginning of a long-term friendship like it is with our previous initiators of the brain circle. I just want to say something for those of you who have not been to the brain circle, what it is. So it's an event of friendship. We, the scientists, are often considered, bizarre people sitting in our dark laboratories, and we don't want to be in our ivory towers. On the contrary, we want to be part of the community and reach out to the people. So this is the essence of this event. It should be informal. You are here to learn from us, and we are here to learn from you and about you. And this is the whole story of the brain circle. It's about friendship and community, and I really hope that we will have a great time in these coming days. And with that said, let's go. Okay, so I've taken up, so I was the co-director with my colleague and friend Eli for many years, and I stepped down a year and a half ago, and I decided to start to study a new topic which has to do with sex and the brain. And today I was brave enough or stupid enough to try and tell you about sex and the brain, and as Idan likes to say, where is sex in our brain? Given that the topics that we're going to discuss span from artificial intelligence that Chaim will and Idan will talk about to hardcore biology, I started by asking ChatGPT, which is one of the smartest AIs around, please define sex. And ChatGPT told me that sex refers to the biological characteristics that distinguishes organisms as male or female. These characteristics are typically determined by the presence of certain reproductive organs, chromosomes, and secondary sexual characteristics such as body hair, breast development, and voice pitch. And if you look at the animal kingdom, indeed, it's often very easy to identify males from females. You can see this in this beautiful image of the mandarin ducks. This is the colorful male, and this is the female. And these external signs can tell us who is a male and who is a female, quite easily. And there are many animals in the animal kingdom where you can easily make this distinction. But we're interested in the brain, in what's in the head, and as I mentioned before, when we're talking about the brain, we're also talking about behavior. So the second question I asked ChatGPT is whether the behavior of male and female are different. Okay, so I asked them, what are the behavioral differences between male and female? Are there any differences between male and female? And here he started to become a little bit more politically correct. Okay? So behavioral differences between males and females can be influenced by a combination of biological, social, and cultural factors. These differences are not universal and can vary widely among individuals and across cultures, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on, a few paragraphs. But he said, nevertheless, here are some general trends of behavioral differences that have been observed in various studies. Playing, risk-taking, empathy, role as parents, sexual behavior, etc. Okay, so I started, like I told you, to dig into this topic of sex and the brain. And just before we start, just to put things on the table, as ChatGPT told us, sex in humans is a very complicated issue. Indeed, in humans, societal attitudes, norms are shifting, leading to greater recognition of a wide spectrum of behaviors, rather than some strict gender-based distinction. Okay, so it's a little bit hard for me to speak about humans. And in humans, whether behaviors or brains show sex differences is a highly debated issue. In fact, if you ask me what is the consensus of whether there are differences in the brains between male and female, the answer would be no. So, for example, in a recent human study, which did a meta-analysis of 30 years of work comparing male brains and female brains, the result was that there is not much differences. So, on average, there is male brains are a little bit larger than female brains, but if you correct for size, there are no differences survive this correction. Okay, so there are no differences between males and females, and sex, male or female, accounts for about 1% of the variance between the different males. So, just to make clear about the talk of today, so this is, for example, from their paper. They say our findings are interpreted as rebutting popular discourse about male brains and female brains as distinct organs. There's no such thing as a male brain or a female brain. So, with your permission, we're going to put humans aside. Okay? And I'm going to go to where I'm comfortable, because where I can tell you about science, where sex is not a debated issue, or not as a debated issue. And when I talk about what we know about brain mechanisms of sex and sexual behavior, we talk about what we call model organisms in brain sciences. And the best knowledge that we know of today is in animals like the mouse, which is a genetic model in brain sciences, and also the fly. I'm going to mention the fly a little bit. We're going to stop. And most of what I'm going to tell you is about what we know about the mammalian sexual behavior in the brain. Okay? So before we start, we're going to take a little, we're going to relax a little bit. Can you hear them?
No.
You're setting the scene, huh?
It's really soft. There.
Yes.
Even educated, please do it.
Okay. So this is Ella Fitzgerald. This talk is going to be a PG-13 rated talk. And as Ella tells us, birds do it, bees do it, fleas do it. Let's do it. Let's fall in love with sex and the breast. So we are going to start with the flies. So when you look at flies having sex, it's an extremely stereotyped behavior, and also, and that's the point I want to make, it's a dimorphic behavior. It's different between males and females. Like I told you, in humans it's complicated, but in flies it's not. The male has a role and the female has a role. Initially they meet, the male starts the courtship, he's tapping on her back, normally he's singing to her with his wings, he's licking the tip of her sex organs, and he's attempting copulation until copulation is complete. And this behavior is extremely stereotyped. Any two flies that you take, you will find this sequence of events, which is sexually dimorphic. Okay, so let's look at how it looks like. So the first step, as I said, is the courtship, from courtship to copulation. The male is the one who initiates the courtship. This is the male, and this is the female. He sings to her, he taps, and he sings with his wings. Okay, he's vibrating his wings. The second step is the female's role. Okay, she responds to the song by extruding the tip of her body, and then she makes the decision if there's going to be copulation or not. If she's already mated, she's going to extrude it long, externally very long, but if she's a virgin, she will extrude it only halfway, And the third step, again, he's licking the back of her sex organ, and if she accepts, if he finds it and he attempts copulation, if it's extruded, it's not working, but if it's partially extruded, it will be a successful copulation. Okay. So the point I want to make here, again, is that it's an extremely stereotyped behavior between the male and the female, and it's dimorphic. So males have a role in sex and females have a role in sex for the fly. Okay? And the question arises is whether sexual behavior is dimorphic or not. Are there roles for males and females? And there are great examples in nature. This is actually from Netflix. This is a courtship dance by a male bird. This is the female. Okay? Now this behavior is done only by males. You will not see the females dancing. He's showing off. Okay, and he has one thing in mind. Good. The point I want to make is that this behavior is male specific. You can find it only in males and not in females, in this particular species. Okay? Okay, let's look at mammals. Do mammals have specific male behaviors? And the answer is yes. This is the male mouse. And this is a regular odor in the room. He doesn't smell it. I just want to maybe stop it so I can explain what you're seeing here. Okay, so when there's a control odor in the room, the male will go around, he will do nothing. But once there's a female odor, he is exposed to female odor, he will start peeing all around the room. Okay, this is called scent marking, or urination. Okay, so he's wandering around this cage doing nothing. What you see here is an image of the floor, a heat map of the urine. This is just a regular odor, and now we throw in female odor in the room, and initially he smells it, and he starts peeing all over. This is a male-specific behavior. Females don't do that. When a male smells the female odor, he will start peeing around and mark his scent all over the cage. Okay, so this is a male-specific behavior. I want to make the case or convince you that there are male-specific and female-specific behaviors. Currently, we're focusing on males. Here's another one. This is called male vocalizations. So, this is the male, the female is coming into the room, and once he smells her, serenada, he starts singing. Okay? This is only males do this. Females don't sing. Okay? He will sing and sing until she has her own role in the context of this courtship behavior. So the point I want to make, again, is that sexual behavior is a sexually dimorphic behavior. Males have specific behaviors and females have specific behaviors in sex. Okay? And from such examples in nature, we know one, as I mentioned for 5 times, there are sexually dimorphic behaviors. These are stereotyped and have a strong innate component. And the fact that these behaviors are so robust and stereotyped allow us to study the underlying neural mechanisms in the brain of sexual behavior. Okay? So let's go and start to see what we can learn about sex. This is the last slide of flies. All I can tell you is it's 2023 and I can proudly say we know everything that we need to know about fly sex. Fly sexual behavior is pretty much solved. And when I say solved, it means that we can identify the exact same neurons in the brain that process the female or process the male. Which specific pathways and synapses are activated, etc. Much of what Eli mentioned. We can pinpoint exactly that this neuron is a male-specific neuron, and I can, with genetics, I can change a male to a female and a female to a male. And as far as we can say how do we understand a brain mechanism, this is pretty much solved. Okay? But when we go to the mammalian brain, things are not solved yet. It's not as clear. But studies in rodents, in mice, are starting to give us clues on where is the sexual mechanism in the brain. What I'm showing you here is a slide that Idan gave me about the reconstruction in the computer of the cortex and some other regions in the mouse brain. And we are making slowly progress in many aspects of how we understand the brain, the human brain, but also the mouse brain. You are going to hear about it throughout the next couple of days. Okay, so Ami is going to focus, I assume, on some circuits. Nomi is going to talk about some molecules, and on other molecules and other brain circuits, etc. Okay, so I have to admit we don't really understand sex in the mammalian brain, but I'm going to tell you what we do know. Okay, so we're going to know on what is the state of the art in terms of sexual behavior in the mammalian brain. And again, this is I promise it's the last time I'm saying this. In mice, sexual behavior is very clearly dimorphic. There's a role for the female and role for the male. And when you put a male and a female in, people or scientists can start to score specific behaviors that are male-specific, attempting to mount, intromate, etc., and behaviors that are female-specific. They reject the male, they are receptive to the male, they do all kinds of strange behaviors like lordosis, etc. I'm not going to go into the details. And that's the starting point. Okay, male and female sexual behavior is different. And the question is now where do we start? Okay, so we have a male specific behavior and a female specific behavior, and the question is where is the starting point for a scientist? The easiest starting point are the genes, the chromosomes. As you know, females are XX and males are XY. The 23rd pair of chromosome is a Y chromosome. If you're an XY, you're a male. If you're an XX, you're a female. So let's see if there's something in the Y chromosome that makes us male. Okay? And indeed, to cut a long story short, scientists found a gene in the XY chromosome. The gene is called SRY, or sex-determining region Y, and it can be found in embryos which are male embryos. What you see here are two images of mouse embryos in the womb of their mother. These are 12 days old embryos, and already these cells here only in the XY start to express this protein which is called SRY. To cut a long story short, what SRY does is make testes. What testes do, they produce testosterone, and the male sequence is complete. Okay, so if you have an XY, you have a gene, a single gene called SRY, which make testes, testosterone, and males have testosterone. The default biological program in the embryo is actually to make females. If there is no testosterone, the animal will become a female. That's the default mode of the biology. But if this gene expresses, testes are going to develop and testosterone will start to express. And indeed, testes make testosterone, but ovaries make a different hormone which is called estradiol. And these two, this couple, testosterone and estradiol, are the main sex hormones of our body. And they are the front runners of sex. Okay, these two hormones. Testosterone for males and estradiol for females. They are so powerful and so central to sex that if you take a male mouse and you castrate it, you take out its testes, and there's no testosterone in the body, he will show no sexual behavior at all. He has no testosterone. He will stop mating, stop courting, all these beautiful behaviors you saw, they will stop. But if you take a castrated male and you inject into it testosterone, the whole sequence of sexual behavior reappears. Okay, so we say that testosterone is necessary and sufficient for sexual behavior. And the same thing is true for estradiol in females. You take a female and you take out its ovaries, and there's going to be no estradiol in the circulating blood. This animal will show no sexual behavior at all. Okay, so an ovurectomized animal will female will show no sexual behavior. But you take estradiol and you inject it into this animal, it will regain its sexual behavior. So these are two central hormones, testosterone and estradiol, that are important for sexual behavior. And indeed, if you take adult mice, testosterone and estradiol are circulating in the blood. These are called activational effects of these sex hormones. Okay? This is a well-known description of these hormones, and it's called activational effects. Testosterone and estradiol start at puberty, but as I told you, SRY makes testosterone early on, around birth. Okay? And these SRY genes, etc., which make testosterone, they have a small peak during birth, which make male brains. Okay? Let's run through that sentence again. You take an embryo, you give it a peak, a boost of testosterone, it will become a male. And then testosterone goes down. If I take a female embryo and inject to it an XX chromosome, and inject to it testosterone, she will become a female, but her brain will be male-like brain. Okay? So we call this the organizational effect of testosterone. Okay? So there are two different types of effects of these sex hormones. One are organizational effects. This is the first time the male and the female brain diverge, early on in birth. And it's because of testosterone. And then it stops. No sex hormones when the animal develops. And at puberty, the sex hormone goes up, and it's called activational effect. So this theory of the organizational activational model of sex hormones is one of the basic theories in neuroendocrinology and in neurobiology of sexual behavior and sex in general. Okay, this is like textbook stuff. Every biology student knows about this theory. There's a peak of testosterone which makes, XY, SRY testes makes this testosterone which makes a male brain, and then there's quiet, and during puberty there's testosterone and estradiol, which also cycles with the monthly cycle, not monthly in mice, of course. The estradiol cycle is a few days long in mice. Okay, so until now I didn't talk about the brain at all. I just told you about hormones that are circulating in the blood. And these are coming from the gonads, from the ovaries and from the testes. And in fact, there is a dialogue between the gonads, between the testes and the ovaries, and the brain. These circulating hormones reach the brain and affect the brain. And finally, after 30 minutes or 25 minutes of an introduction, we can talk about the brain. So, burn the brain is sex. So I want to talk about two brain regions tonight. One is called the hypothalamus, shown here in blue. And it's responsible for all the innate, animal-like behaviors of the brain. The automatic, innate aspects of the brain. And the cortex. And by the end of this talk today, you will be experts on sex and hypothalamus and cortex. But let's talk about hypothalamus first. Okay. So the first thing, one thing I want to tell you about the hypothalamus is that it has receptors which are sensitive to the sex hormones. You take the cells in the hypothalamus, they express receptors that are sensitive to estradiol and testosterone. So that's an important thing. But let's look at cells in the brain that are male-specific or female-specific. I told you in humans this is highly debatable, politically correct, you don't want to go into that discussion. In mice, there's no discussion. There are brain regions which are male-like, and female-like. Okay? Now, there are no regions in the brain which appear in a female but not in a male and vice versa. It's only about the number of cells in these regions and the connections within them. So, for example, a region called medial amygdala is present in male and female, but it has many more cells in male. A region called AVPV in the hypothalamus has many more cells in female as opposed to male. Okay? So behaviors we saw, you're already convinced that they're dimorphic. I'm telling you that a male and a female brain are also dimorphic. They're different between males and females, but it's in the number of cells and the connections. Here's how it looks like, for example. Okay, this is the medial amygdala in a mouse. These are the cells in a male brain, and these are the cells in the female brain. You may appreciate there are more cells here in the male brain as opposed to the female brain. It's so clear that if you're a brain expert in this region, you will know whether you see a male brain or a female brain based on the number of cells. Okay? Another intriguing issue, which brings me into the picture, of the hypothalamic dimorphic brain region, is that they receive input from smell, from olfaction. And these animals are highly sensitive to olfactory cues. Okay, so the hypothalamus is highly sensitive to smell, and once smell goes through the nose, it hits these hypothalamic brain regions and assumingly activates sexual behavior. Okay? Great. So, before we're going to go into the hardcore details of the science, I want to introduce another male-like behavior, or male behavior. And this behavior in mice, but you can see this in the wild, and in many animals, in fact across the animal kingdom, is aggression. So when a male meets another male, they will fight.
No?
If, not always, but if you step into my territory and I'm a mouse, I will beat you up. And that's a male-like behavior. Females, I'll go into your house, you won't do anything, you will welcome me very nicely. So, one of these mice, that's his home cage. Okay, we call him the resident, and the other one is an intruder. We put them back in the cage, and see what happens. This is aggression. He starts to fight. They are beating it up. We have to stop this experiment, okay? Because otherwise, the bully mouse will beat him up, and he will be wounded. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so I introduced to you. You already saw one male-like behavior, which is courtship and mounting. But this is another type of behavior called attack. In many ways, it's the opposite of sexual behavior. Now, people have knocked out a single gene from the olfactory system and observed that these mice were generally normal, without one of these genes called TREPC2. We won't go into the details. And they did this intruder-resident assay. And lo and behold, this is what they observed. These are two males. One is the resident, and the other one is the intruder. And instead of attacking the male, which it normally does, this transgenic animal is trying to mate the other male. So he confuses the male with the female and is attempting to mate the male. One gene you take out of the genome and you flip completely the behavior from a male-specific attack to a male-specific behavior on males. Okay, so that's hard to explain. As I told you,
Away the sense of smell. Just by taking the smell.
yes, actually the sense of smell is a little bit complicated, taking one part of the sense of smell, and suddenly the male no longer identifies my intruder as a male, but rather as a female, and trying to copulate with it. Okay? Okay, and I told you, the input from the smell is into the region called the hypothalamus. This region is receiving a whole lot of this olfactory inputs. So researchers actually, 10 years ago, not too long ago, ablated the hypothalamus, and not surprisingly, they found that if a normal male sees a female and will try to mount it for 25 times in an assay, when you take out the hypothalamus, it drops down to about 50%. So a brain without a hypothalamus, the male-specific sexual behavior will go down. But surprisingly, when this male sees a male, the attacking also goes down. So this was a weird result. It was hard to explain. Because initially we thought, we were not sure what are the brain circuits that are responsible or triggering the attack, the aggressive behavior, versus triggering the sexual behavior. And now they're saying, okay, this must be a hub of attack and sex together. Okay? So that was a puzzling result. And only recently, a few years ago, these researchers said, okay, we're not going to knock this part out. We're going to stick an electrode into the brain, into this blue region, and record the activity of the cells. And what they found is that when the animal sees an object, nothing happens. This is the gray trace. When this male brain sees a female, the activity rises and it will mate with the animal. But when this same male, I'm just recording, this is a normal male, okay? A normal male brain. I'm recording from this region, the activity goes halfway and I'm going to attack. So this is like a dial in the hypothalamus. If you dial it halfway through, I identify this animal as a male and I attack it. If you dial it all the way through, I identify it as a female and I mate with it. Okay? And if you look at this knockout, the genetic mouse, which has no sense of smell, the activity in these animals go high, and when a male sees a male, it will not attack it, but rather confuse it with a female. Okay? So this is a dial, this hypothalamic brain region is receiving olfactory inputs, and it's like a dial which you can dial in whether you identify the animal as a male or a female. Okay, so this is as far as we know. Actually, 2 weeks ago there was a nice paper also in the same journal, which is a high-profile paper, Solving Male Sexual Behavior, but this is for the next brain circle. I'll tell you what's the state of the art on male sex. So I have to admit I gave the talk to my lovely wife, Avit, who you may know, or if you don't know, you should meet with her. And Ravit is a feminist, and she told me, you're only talking about male brains. Okay? This is not right. You should talk about female brains. She's right. Most of the data in the literature is about the male brain. And in fact, science and academia has been biased to study male brains. This is something that is being corrected in the past around 10 or 15 years, I think. We're starting more and more to study female brains. I myself in my lab, I'm afraid of my wife, so I study only female brains. But I just want to show you this mouse, which is a knockout for the olfactory system. Doesn't have a sense of smell. And this is the gray mouse or the brown mouse is a female, and the black one is a male. Okay, this is a female, this is a male. So you look at this genetic knockout of these animals, and all the hell breaks loose. You saw the males before mounting on males, but the females are also mounting on males. Sodom and Gomorrah, everybody is mounting on everybody, and all hell breaks loose. So what's happening in the female's brain, we don't know yet. Okay, so this is to be continued. There's much less known about what's happening in the female brain, but rest assured, with a very small manipulation, you can change completely the sexual behavior of female brains.
Sorry, but what did you manipulate in the female?
Here it's the same thing. We take out the olfactory, the sense of olfaction.
Only the sense of smell.
Yeah, before you saw that males change attack to mating on males. Okay, male to male. I see Ami, normally I attack him. But if I don't have my sense of smell, I will try to mate with him. But females, normally females will welcome a male and there's a discussion, courtship and what have you. But if I take the sense of smell out of the female, she will try to mount the male, so the roles switch. Okay? So you can't say things are not interesting in our laboratories studying minds. Yes?
Do animals also have homosexuality?
So that's these are questions I was So first of all, there are monkey species, etc., that do show mating on males, and yes, there are cases in the animal kingdom, but I think this is a much more complicated issue, which has to do with the human neuroscience of sexual behavior, which one I know very little about. I mean, I'm not an expert in that at all. And as I said, this has to do with social issues, cultural issues, and it's much more complicated for me to give you valid scientific answers about that. What I can say is that there's no clear genetic identification of homosexuality and things like that.
But in rodents?
In rodents, I'm not aware of. Okay? Okay. So this brings me, I don't know how much time I have, Kim? 10 minutes. Okay. So this brings me to studies in my laboratory. As I said, after I stepped down as ELSEC director, I'm starting to study sex in the lab. And specifically, I'm studying adolescence. And adolescence is a great period, or I would like to make the argument that adolescence is a great period in the lifetime of the animal, because before adolescence, you see no sexual behavior. And after adolescence, after these hormones peak, you start to see sexual behavior. And this period, something exciting is happening in this period in terms of the hormones that we know of, but also in the brain. There are very interesting issues or things that happen in the brain during this period, and my lab started to study adolescence in the past year or so. So first of all, what we know about adolescence, and those of you who have adolescent children at home or are interacting with adolescents know that it's an exciting time as well, okay? So the literature, the psychological literature is very well established. There are all kinds of things that change, okay? Social dynamics, the salience of social dynamics changes. Since very basic sensation, novelty seeking is changing. Even things like face processing, how my brain is processing a face or a male or a female is changing. Changes in sleep, circadian regulation, understanding of ourselves, others, and the complexities of social relationship. These are all well-known phenomena that occur in adolescent humans, in this case. Okay, we know much less about the neurobiology of adolescence at the level that I showed you before, at the level of the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and the cortex. But one thing is remarkable. If you look at the development of the cortex and the development of the hypothalamus develops much faster. So when the animal and the cortex is lagging behind, okay? And we call this the mismatch. So an adolescent animal is ready to have sex in terms of its hypothalamic circuits. Okay? It's like the mice I showed you. This is already in place. But the cortex is not ripe yet. And the cortex is the brain region which is responsible for intelligent thinking, high-order thinking, social interaction. And until this mismatch is over, we are in a sensitive period. It's a fragile period, so you don't want the adolescents to have sex too early. You need the whole brain circuit to be fully established. And this region, during adolescence, when there's a mismatch between hypothalamic circuits, which are already in place, and cortex, which is not ripe yet, is an extremely interesting time. So I put my money and effort now on this interesting time when there's a mismatch between the cortical development and the hypothalamic development. But it also tells you that sexual behavior, at least in humans, but I would argue not only, is not only an innate component. Okay? This is also maybe, since we are friends and we're going to get each other, we're going to get personal in the next few days, I want to tell you that my mother, my late mother, she was a sex therapist. And so in a way I'm closing, I'm starting to study sex, so she's looking at me from above and maybe she's very proud. For sure.
For sure, she's very proud of you.
Anyway, So my mother saw patients, etc., for many years. But my grandmother, I had an old Yemenite grandmother, you know. So what is this job, you know? Go get a real job. Telling people how to say sex, how to do sex. Any animal can have sex, you know. You don't need to be smart to have sex. So, what I told you, you may have got the impression that my grandmother was correct. It's only innate circuits and you can, you know, turn on and off the hypothalamus and have sex. But no, my mother was correct. You do need the cortex and you do need to learn social interaction and empathy and many other things in order to have sex appropriately or correctly. Okay, so the argument is this: there's an interplay between the cortex and the hypothalamic circuits that are important for sexual behavior. So I'm just going to show you with a few, going to end up with a few short examples of what we found. So first I wanted to show that adolescent mice don't have sex, or, you know, we know that they don't have sex. If two adolescent mice meet each other, they will not have sex. But I wanted to test the sensitivity to olfactory cues, to attractive cues. And the way we do it, we put our mice in these cages and we put a drop of urine. And if you take a female mice, note, okay, and I was asking whether females are attracted to male urine. And the answer is, as you can see, yes. We put a drop of urine here and a drop of urine here, and we track the trajectory of the animal running around. And an adult female will stop and sniff for a given amount of time the male urine. Okay, so we call this an attraction to male urine because statistically there's much more green here as compared to when you put your distilled water, and you don't see this data at all in adolescent animals. Okay, so this is a young animal. They run to the same extent. Actually, youngsters often will run more, but they won't stop and be attracted from the odors. And this is data from our lab. You can see that if you compare distilled water to male urine, an adult female will show a clear attraction, okay, as compared to the water, but adolescents show no such attraction at all. So we know the hormones. There's no hormones in the youngsters, but there are in the adults, and we also know now that there's no attraction in the female. And now we started to activate these regions with an odor. So if you take an adult and you play an odor, let's say mouse urine, you will get nice activation in the hypothalamus, as expected. I mean, you just went through a full lecture on how important the hypothalamus is. So you see nice activation. You also see nice activation in the cortex, which I told you was not fully developed, but nevertheless, you get very nice activation by an odor as compared to distilled water. But if you look at adolescents, actually the cortex is activated, but the hypothalamus is not activated. So one, it strengthens our initial hypothesis, okay, that in adults you see nice activation in the hypothalamus, but in adolescents you don't at all. But interestingly, I told you that this dialogue between the cortex and the hypothalamus is not ripe yet, and it's important that it will develop before full sexual interactions. Okay, so but what we find is that olfactory cues activate cortex, but not the hypothalamus. And we just now finished an anatomical assay showing that fibers from the nose to the hypothalamus are very weak in adolescents, which are shown here in gray. Which means that the adolescent brain, as I said, has fewer fibers going from the nose to the hypothalamus, although this is actually fully intact early on. And in the adults, we see the full fibers going into the hypothalamus. And add to this complexity what I told you, that we know that the cortex is not fully developed yet. So there are two things here. One is that the information from the nose acts like a gate early on. So biology made sure that the information doesn't trigger the hypothalamus. Okay? So the young animals will not get confused at all, because this pathway in a way is blocked. It's like a closed gate. But once it opens, we need the cortical information to talk with the hypothalamus in order to have a good dialogue between cortex and hypothalamus. So to summarize what I told you about today, you should be experts on sex. You should know that sex hormones, testosterone and estradiol, are critical. They are circulating in our blood, and they are critical for normal sexual function. I also told you everything is solved in the fly, although I didn't dwell on the details. And we are making slow baby steps in order to understand mammalian sexual behavior, focusing on mice. And particularly, we know one thing or another about the hypothalamus as an important hub for sex, and we know much less about the role of cortex in sex and the dialogue between cortex and sex. And one avenue is olfaction. I myself also studied the auditory system. As you saw, the males are singing to each other, and in fact, when two animals engage in courtship and sexual interaction, it's not only smell. It's smell, it's sounds, it's touch, it's odors, of course, as I mentioned, and all of these remain unknown today in terms of sexual relationships. And with this, I want to thank you for listening and take any questions. Yes.
Yeah, quick question regarding, I mean, all the study is really on mouse.
Yep.
And although there is probably a large correlation among different mammals, what conclusion can you draw on humans?
Yeah, so this is a general question which is valid, I would say, through many of our talks. And one is that there are many aspects in science which are very stable across evolution, that we learned a whole lot from very simple animals like mollusks and flies and mice, etc., that are also true in humans. But as you go higher in the hierarchy, in the complexity, and sex is a complex issue, then it starts to become gray and unclear. This is short for, I don't know what is going to be valid in the mouse studies to the humans, and that your question is spot on and correct. And this is something that we as scientists struggle a whole lot. If I want to do serious science and causal science, go into the brain and kill cells and activate cells and change cells, etc., we cannot do these experiments ethically in humans, so we have to go to lower animals. And there are studies in monkeys, there are studies in mice, etc., in the context of mammals. There are other animals that we study. And at this point in time, I don't think I can say that what is relevant in those papers that I showed you, those studies that I showed you, to the human condition. However, this goes back to what Ellie said. Okay, we are writing the textbook, if you will. Okay, this is what we call basic science, and we're trying to understand basic principles, which we hope are true, or to some extent are true, and maybe there are variations, and most likely there are variations in other animals like humans. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but tell me if I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I was.
It's a politically correct answer.
For instance, the hypothalamus in a human would have at least the same role as one. I mean, what?
Yes, absolutely. So in gross brush strokes, many things are similar between. Actually, I have this slide. I didn't show it. Maybe I should show this, okay? This is a fly brain. It has 100,000 neurons. This is drawn to scale, huh? This is 5 centimeters. This is the mouse brain. It has 75 million cells. This is the human brain with 100 billion cells. So, I can stand up here and show off what we know about, or what we don't know about sexual behavior, but we have to be humble on what we conclude when we go from this to this. Okay, this is a remarkable machine that is going to keep society busy for many years. Okay, they're not going to fire us for having all the answers. I don't know, maybe ChatGPT and artificial intelligence will solve it, but Chaim will tell us if he can solve sexual behavior in humans. Currently, the biology can't. Yeah.
I don't know how to word my question very clearly, but from your description of how a mouse can become a she mouse or a he mouse, are there any applications in humans with transgender? In other words, as I said, I can't. But there seem to be similarities. It made me think of others.
No, absolutely, it makes you think. Absolutely, it makes you think. Okay, there's actually another work I did not show here about odors that come from tears of juvenile mice, which activate regions in the male brain, in the adult male brain, which cause it not to mate on adolescent, on young animals. And if you take out these receptors in the male brain, he will stop mating with the young mice, with adolescent mice, which immediately makes you think about, the biological mechanism of pedophiles and going after, sex predators on young children, etc. So these things makes you think. I can only tell you that in the literature which we consider serious, robust, etc., definitely biologically, there is no good substrate to say anything intelligent biologically on transgender people. Okay, it's just two different levels of analysis, so I can't say anything that we know about the hypothalamus of the transgender human being versus the cortex of the transgender human being, for example.
Have any of the examples which you've given here on mice been applied to humans?
No. No. Okay. This topic is also, I gave this, not this, but a similar talk for the general public. So people think that there are two brain circuits that balance aggressiveness and empathy. Okay, so these are two competing. So maybe Ami is going to talk about this. Okay. So it makes you think. I mean, there are people who are extremely aggressive in society, which are locked up for violence and things like that. On one hand, on the other hand, people which are highly with a high empathy. Maybe we can start to tweak their hypothalamic circuits, and make killers less aggressive. And so I think there are examples in society, I guess, which are even more burning than transgender people, who is I would say, in terms of numbers, a smaller issue. So there's much less science on transgenders than on circuits of aggression, for example. So it goes back to the question of, I forgot your... Gila. Or the question of Gila. Okay, to what extent we can... And you will see examples throughout the brain circle. What have we learned from animal studies on humans? And we just have to be humble on what we find and what we claim. So that's one thing. And I need to communicate to you what is the science that is known about transgenders, but it's just a different ballgame. It's not at the level or resolution of study that we can study in mice. Okay, Eli touched upon the different levels. In mice, we have access to the different levels. Okay, Iran will talk about genetics and molecules and the amnion circuits, so you will see. But in humans, just experiments we can't do or haven't been done. And normally, there are leaps. I mean, sometimes you can, I'm not aware of, okay, but sometimes you can find a case in the clinic with a very interesting clinical diagnosis that couples well to behavior. So we can say something causal. Okay, in memory, for example, in working memory, there are very good examples on what we know about humans from humans. Okay, because of all kind of clinical situations that taught us about memory. But in terms of sexual behavior, I'm not aware of such a study.
May I ask a last question? A man becomes a lady or a lady becomes a man. Is it done naturally in their body, or is there a little bit of help from science?
So it's done, as I mentioned, it's done from so there's a gene in the chromosome.
Yes, that's right.
There's a gene in the Y chromosome. When it's activated, and this stops the whole sequence of events of becoming a male.
So it has nothing to do with science. It happens naturally.
Yeah. The expression, well, we have to ask Eran Meshorer about how genes are expressed and what controls them. But this is, the wonders of the development of the body and the brain. This is something you don't need to guide from outside. There's a sequence of events, of genetic events and molecular events, which...
Without any help.
Yeah, no help. But if we come from the outside, I can take a female, inject testosterone, and make her brain a male brain. I told you that.
Okay.
She's giving me the look number 5, so let's take a last question.
Yeah, you mentioned that at birth there is a peak in the hormones that make the brain male. But
Yes.
what does it mean to make the brain male?
It means
At
that...
that point.
Yes, that's a great question. It means that when the animal matures and I inject testosterone to it, it will start to react like a male. That's all it means. It means that the circuits in the brain are male-like. Okay? So they become male-like if they just have this peak of testosterone.
If you inject testosterone in a female, she starts acting.
No, if you inject the testosterone in a female,
Nothing happens.
right. I mean, some things happens, but yes. That's the normal trajectory.
Because the brain does not.
Yeah, but if I take a female in the embryo and I inject testosterone, she will show male-like behavior. Okay, thank you very much. Let's have a great evening.